Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport. The fastest racing cars in the world, the most advanced technology on four wheels. But, as with all things, not all in motorsport is equal. Some cars are more equal than others. Quantifying what is the best F1 car of all time, well, that's difficult. But we've had a go, taking into account win percentages and the incredible technology behind the wins. So, these are the 9 we think stand proud ahead of the rest, and it begins with one of the most iconic. Not only was the McLaren MP44 statistically the most successful F1 car of all time, it was also the car that won Ayrton Senna his first title. The MP44 didn't win the Italian Grand Prix in 1988, and that was it. He won every single other race that year. That is the kind of feat that has never been repeated, and it equates to a win percentage of 93.9%. The keys to a legendary car are all there. Take 2 of the greatest drivers of all time, Senna and Prost, stick them in a car with the best engine around, a chassis designed with input from not just chief designer Steve Nichols, but also a certain Gordon Murray, and add a brilliant livery. With Honda power poached from rivals Williams and a sleek body replacing its slightly podgy-looking predecessor, the MP44 won its first race by 10 seconds in the hands of Prost, despite him easing off for much of the race to save fuel. By the end of the season, Prost had won 7 races, Senna had won 8 and was world champion, and all would be well at McLaren for the future with absolutely no infighting. The Alfa Romeo 158 is not a Formula One car. There, I said it. Despite winning the Formula One Championship, the Alfetta was not then, and is not now, an F1 car. What are you talking about? Well, the 158, world champion in 1950, the first season of F1, was actually built to compete in the 1930s. And it wasn't even built to compete at the very top end of Grand Prix racing. It slotted in to the smaller voiturette category. But then the whole global conflict thing happened, and people decided that throwing cars around circuits at great speed was probably not the best use of time. So racing cars were put under cloths and stocked away in sheds until it all blew over. Then, nearly a decade later, when people started racing again, they didn't really have the spare money, or actually metal, to build new cars. So vehicles like the Alfetta were hauled out of storage and pressed into action. By 1950, with a honking great supercharger that meant the 1.5 litre straight 8, yes, 8, had 300 horsepower, the World Championship was born. And when Alfa entered the 158, well, they won every race they entered. Annoyingly for Alfa Romeo, that didn't give them a 100% record. You see, the Indy 500 was part of the World Championship then, and Alfa skipped it. So the Alfetta, for all its dominance, only won 85% of the races in 1950. Still, Giuseppe Farina was pretty happy to take the title. And then, in 1951, the Alfetta returned as the 159 and did it again. This time with some bloke called Fangio. The Ferrari 500 is not an F1 car. Wait, is this the right script? Oh yes. It turns out that when Alfa Romeo left racing, there weren't any F1 cars left. So F1 ran to F2 regs for the 1952 season. Former Alfa stalwart Enzo Ferrari had made his own team by this point. And Ferrari had built a car to F2 regs, so they were ready. Alberto Ascari was the man for the job of piloting the 500 to victory, and he duly did, winning every single race he entered. Ascari skipped 2 races, including the 500, but fear not, Piero Taruffi won the other one in a Ferrari. So another season of Italian dominance was secured. Come 1953, things had changed. Ascari only won 5 of the 8 races this time, and a second title. Ferrari even had a go at the Indy 500, but the less said about that effort, the better. Over 2 seasons, the 500 had an impressive 93.3% win record. And in reality, it did soldier on. It was just called the 625, and now had to race in a field of actual F1 cars with a 2.5-litre engine, which, it turned out, was never what it was meant to do. Although, it did win 2 more races. Maranello again, and this time with an actual F1 car. You could quite easily pick any of the cars Ferrari produced and Michael Schumacher drove between 2000 and 2004 and stick them on this list. But it was the F2002 that just about shades it. So dominant had Ferrari become by 2002 that they didn't actually bother introducing their new season car until the 3rd race of the season. And then the F2002 would race on until the 4th race of 2003. It was that good. Powered by an iconic 3-litre V10, the F2002 wasn't actually the most powerful car on the grid. BMW and Williams take that accolade. But it had such an innovative gearbox that designer Rory Byrne could package the car in almost any way he wanted. Combine that incredible chassis with Michael Schumacher at his absolute pomp, and it was a recipe for dominance. The F2002 won nearly 3 times as many races as any other car, and then it won a couple more races the following season. It is only because of Daniel Ricciardo, Max Verstappen, and some other things like Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg hitting each other that the Mercedes W07 isn't top of this list. It won 19 races in total, which is a record, and was by far and away the fastest car in the 2016 season. Even among the incredible feats of dominance that Mercedes has pulled off in F1 over the last few years, the W07 stands out. But it didn't win 3 races, dragging that all-important win rate down to 90.4%. It was, though, a season where Lewis Hamilton won a barely believable 10 races and still didn't win the title, because his teammate did. The W07, powered by a hybrid V6 engine measuring just 1.5 litres, also set some pretty serious records. Most points in a season, 756. Most podiums, 33. Most poles in a season, 20. And the highest percentage of poles in a single season, 95.2%. After the W07, with regulation changes, competitors have gotten closer, at least in terms of pace and certainly in terms of engines. But the catchily named PU106C motor in the W07 must go down as one of the finest ever built. A bit like Mercedes, you could pick pretty much every one of 4 different Red Bull machines to put in this list. Each propelled Sebastian Vettel to a world title. Each was powered by a screaming Renault V8. But it was the RB9 that obliterated the field. The RB9 won 13 races in a 20-round 2013 season, clinching what is looking increasingly like Sebastian Vettel's final title. And the most amazing thing is that it probably could have been even better. You see, the RB9's Renault engine was not the class of the field. Ferrari and Mercedes were most likely nailing together better power units, but neither of them had Adrian Newey. And Newey himself has even admitted that he didn't spend as much time on the RB9 because the battle for victory with the RB8 in 2012 was so close. Just imagine how good it could have been with a full development program. 75 races and 20 wins doesn't sound that impressive in the present company. But the 72 has an ace up its sleeve. You see, the 72 won 3 Constructors' Championships and 2 Drivers' titles in 6 seasons of racing. It is not one of these modern single-season wonders. A complete innovation when it was launched with inboard brakes, side-mounted radiators and an overhead air intake, the 72 was possibly Colin Chapman's masterpiece. The wedge shape was a complete departure from the normal cigar-shaped designs of the day. Making its debut during the 1970 season, Jochen Rindt reeled off 4 victories in a row after retiring from its first race. So dominant would Rindt and the 72 be that when Rindt was killed in a crash at Monaco, he had enough points to still win the title. Emerson Fittipaldi would add a second title in 1972 and help add a third Constructors' Crown in 1973. In fact, the 72, by then in 72E form, won 3 races in 1974, by which time it was in its 5th consecutive season of competition. No other car has managed to achieve such longevity of success, even if it was not an outright dominator like some others on this list. If you grew up in Britain in the 1990s, then a blue, yellow and white machine with a red 5 on the front was definitely in your toy collection. The Williams FW14B was a development of, you guessed it, the FW14, which arrived to much fanfare in 1991 and proceeded to retire 6 times in 4 races. But when they got it working, Nigel Mansell, a perpetual runner-up, won only 2 fewer races than eventual champion Ayrton Senna. Come 1992, Williams had fixed the troublesome semi-automatic gearbox and tweaked the advanced traction control and active suspension to make the B an even better prospect. And so it was. Mansell, finally given the best car on the grid by a mile, won the first 5 races in a row, a feat that's never been beaten, and won a record 9 races. He also qualified on pole in all but 1 race. The MP42 is quite possibly John Barnard's masterpiece, although he did design some pretty good Ferraris later on. The MP42 won on debut, and then won another 11 times in 1984, 6 the following season, and another 2 in 1986. On its way, it secured 2 constructors' titles for McLaren, 2 drivers' crowns for Alain Prost, and a final crown for Niki Lauda. The MP42 wasn't the first car to have a carbon fibre chassis. That was the MP41. But mated with an in-house financed, Porsche-built, tag-badged turbocharged V6, it was a formidable technical achievement for McLaren. In fact, so good was the MP42 that at times McLaren's rivals struggled just to stay on the same lap, never mind challenge for victory. Weirdly, the car was actually pretty rubbish in qualifying. McLaren refused to run expensive qualifying engines since they were paying for them, so the likes of Brabham trounced them with their 1,500 horsepower qualifying engines. But then on race day, Prost and Lauda would hit the front and just waltz away.